those of the professor and not necessarily reflect the position or policy of the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Your lecturer is Professor Paul Rosenzweig. Professor Rosenzweig is a professorial lecturer in law at the George Washington University Law School, where he lectures on cybersecurity law and policy. He is a cum laude graduate of the University of Chicago Law School. Professor Rosenzweig is the founder of Red Branch Consulting, PLLC, a homeland security consulting company, and a senior advisor to the Chertoff Group. He formerly served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and he is currently a Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Homeland Security Studies and Analysis Institute. Professor Rosenzweig is a senior editor of the Journal of National Security Law and Policy and the author of the recently released Cyber Warfare: How Conflicts in Cyberspace Are Challenging America and Changing the World.
In July 2010, a small computer security firm in Belarus announced that they'd discovered the signature of a new piece of malicious computer software, what we call malware. They gave this new virus an unassuming name, rootkit.temphider. And yet, despite the seemingly innocuous name, this piece of malware was something brand new. Some have called it the world's first cyber-guided missile. The way this new type of cyber threat has transformed the world, and quite possibly changed your life, is the subject of this course. Thank you for joining me as we explore what you need to know about cybersecurity. Together, over the next 18 lectures, we will be learning about the exciting and scary world of cybersecurity. What you'll come to see is that rootkit.temphider is really just the tip of the iceberg. Now, when the Belarus announcement was made, it was nothing unusual, hardly a surprise. After all, Symantec, that's the large cybersecurity firm that sells the Norton antivirus system, discovers more than 400 million new pieces of malware each year. That's for 2011. That's more than 12 new pieces of malware every second. Of course, most of what they look like and discover is simple. It looks a lot like older pieces of malware and is easily identified and rendered harmless. But this new virus, which eventually became known by the name of Stuxnet, was different, very different. In fact, it was so different that we find ourselves staring into a great unknown, just as those who invented air flight or the atomic bomb could not anticipate the consequences of those new technologies, so too Stuxnet is, I think, the harbinger of a changed world. Understanding why that is so is really the entire purpose of this course. In this series of lectures, we will, I think, frighten you a bit as we describe all of the malicious actors in cyberspace, but also, I hope, encourage you by describing how security measures are trying to keep up with the bad actors. At the end, you may be a little wary. The bad actors are still winning today. But you'll understand that the contest isn't hopeless. So let's start with Stuxnet itself. Up until the Stuxnet software was developed, the mantra of many experts was that the effects of cyber conflicts would be restricted to the cyber domain. As one wag put it, cyber war only kills a bunch of little baby electrons. Stuxnet showed the world that cyber war could potentially kill real babies. What Stuxnet did was infect a physical manufacturing plant, in this case, the uranium enrichment facility in Natanz, Iran, and make it malfunction. Using only a cyber virus, Iran's adversary made the machines break down. That's scary, because while Stuxnet only disrupted a uranium purification system, there's nothing at all that limits a cyber assault to uranium purification. The same type of system that runs the Iranian centrifuges also runs the systems that control the heat of their nuclear reactors. It is theoretically no harder to cause the centrifuges to break down than, say, to have graphite control rods pulled out, causing a nuclear meltdown. And if the Iranian facility at Natanz is vulnerable, so is the electric grid in New York City, or the Colorado River's Hoover Dam. Stuxnet was a piece of software code. At bottom, it was just a string of ones and zeros like any other program. Except, of course, this one was malevolent. Stuxnet used what experts call a two-phase attack. In other words, it had two parts. The first part was malware that infected a Windows-based Microsoft operating system. If you run Windows on your computer, then in theory, your computer was also a potential target. So let's call this the delivery phase of the program. The purpose of this delivery phase was to put the attack program in a system that might someday be attached to the target's control system. From this delivery platform, the malware was designed to jump to infect what is known as a SCADA system, a supervisory control and data acquisition system. In this case, one manufactured by Siemens, the German manufacturing giant. In fact, Stuxnet targeted a very specific type of SCADA system software, the S7400 PLC software. And PLC, by the way, stands for Programmable Logic Controller. That's the generic name for the type of software controller that's used to operate large-scale machinery operations worldwide. Now, when Stuxnet jumped from the Microsoft operating system to the SCADA system, this was the attack phase of the program. The entire program required two phases for its attack because, not surprisingly, many SCADA systems that run sensitive or secret machinery are not directly connected to the internet. A direct connection makes a system more vulnerable to intrusion, so operators add an additional layer of security by creating an air gap, that is, making sure that there are no connections between the system and the internet. The Iranian nuclear enrichment program was almost certainly air-gapped from the broader internet. So Stuxnet must have entered the SCADA system through some interaction it had with an external Windows-based program. Nobody quite knows how that happened. Perhaps it was introduced into the control program when an engineer hooked up a Windows-based tablet to collect data for diagnostic purposes. Perhaps it was on one of these, a thumb drive that was mistakenly plugged into a Windows operating interface system. Or, more creatively, it might have been introduced on purpose by a spy who infiltrated the facility for the purpose of introducing the worm into the system. Personally, I kind of enjoy that cloak and dagger image, especially when combined with the high-tech idea of a computer virus. In truth, though, we'll probably never know for sure. Whatever the method of introduction, the second phase of the attack demonstrated a large degree of sophistication. It was designed to target only a single, particular type of operating system, a bit like a precision-guided missile seeking a specific house to bomb. And in identifying its target within the Iranian nuclear enrichment facility, Stuxnet's developers exhibited a significant degree of insider knowledge. They knew exactly what to attack and how to do so. Before we discuss the actual target, however, we have to back up just a bit and talk about uranium and enrichment. As you probably remember, back around 2008 and 2009, many in the West became concerned that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. It probably still is. That effort, combined with its rather extreme rhetoric, raised the hackles of many in the West. It turns out that the uranium that occurs in nature isn't pure enough to work as a nuclear fuel in a reactor. And it also isn't pure enough to work as an explosive material for an atomic bomb. Uranium ore has to be purified to be of real value. And one part of the process of purification requires that a bunch of centrifuges spin at a constant rate of speed. And when we say constant, we mean really, really constant, with very little variation. So it isn't surprising that we use computers, these SCADA systems we've been talking about, to precisely control the speed of the rotors that spin the nuclear centrifuges. When they work right, these SCADA systems can be very precise. The Stuxnet attack changed all that. It manipulated the speed of the centrifuge rotors to make them slow down and then speed up. At one of our national labs in Idaho. The test was known as Aurora, and it involved a malicious computer program. The program worked on a diesel generator, one that isn't too different from the diesel generators used in electricity generating facilities all across America, and in fact, across much of the world. There's a video of the test, and it's really quite incredible. During the test, nobody touches the generator physically. But by the end of the test, black smoke is pouring from the machine. That's definitely not what the engineers had in mind for this piece of machinery. What happened was that the Idaho computer scientists put some malware into the SCADA program. Not Stuxnet, but a moderately close cousin probably. And instead of breaking rotors, they made the generator run itself to death and burn itself out. Now that's pretty scary. Between Aurora and Stuxnet, you can understand why policymakers, lawyers, military leaders around the globe are concerned. Not only did Stuxnet have physical effects, it also hid them. Stuxnet was a surreptitious piece of malware. Buried within the program was a pre-recorded series of data reports on the operation of centrifuges. Now, of course, SCADA systems regularly provide the about how the machine is working. While Stuxnet with centrifuges to operate poorly, it was using pre-recorded data.
The views expressed in this course are those of the professor and do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.